If this story moved you even a little, we'd love to know. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below and let's see how far this story travels. Your words mean more than you know. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, because tomorrow, another heartfelt story is waiting just for you. One that might make you cry, smile, or both. Until then, stay inspired, stay brave, and never stop believing in second chances. See you in the next chapter. A stranger gave her a key and walked away. What she found inside will break you. Avery Bennett had always seen the world differently. While most kids played with toys or stared at the TV, Avery, barefoot on the wooden floors of her family's small Ohio home, would sit for hours with nothing but a stubby pencil and a crumpled notebook, lost in her own universe. At just 7 years old, she could turn a blank page into a bustling market square, a quiet forest, or a portrait of someone's soul. Her parents, though loving, didn't understand it. Her mother cleaned offices on the night shift. Her father, a retired mechanic with bad knees, believed in hard work and steady paychecks. "Art won't put food on the table," he'd mutter, flipping through bills at the kitchen counter. And to them, that was that. Throughout school, Avery never stopped drawing. The margins of her textbooks were filled with doodles, tiny windows into the world she wished she lived in. A well-meaning art teacher once called her parents in for a meeting, excitedly waving a scholarship brochure from an art academy in New York. But the conversation ended before it began. "We can't risk her chasing dreams," her father said. "She needs a career that pays by the hour, not by hope." So, Avery followed the plan. She waited tables at a roadside diner to cover tuition for her business degree, often walking home in worn-out sneakers after 10-hour shifts. She graduated, without honors, without celebration, but with a resume that could get her a job, and that's exactly what she did, landing an entry-level role in the finance department of a rising tech company in downtown Chicago. The office was clean, efficient, and silent. Her cubicle was barely 5 feet wide. Her job? Endless spreadsheets, expense reports, and weekly meetings that drained the color from her cheeks and the spark from her eyes. In those first months, she tried to hold on to herself. She brought a sketch pad in her purse, drawing during lunch breaks in the building's rooftop courtyard. Birds on a ledge, the skyline in the distance, the coffee cup in her hand. But slowly, life's noise got louder. Deadlines replaced daydreams. Her sketches became less frequent, her hands too tired after work to pick up a pencil. Art, once a necessity, began to feel like a luxury. Still, part of her held on. A whisper inside, a quiet refusal to forget. Even as she typed numbers into cells, her heart longed for blank canvases. Even as she smiled in meetings, part of her was sketching the scene in her mind. That duality, doing what she was told while craving what she loved, became her silent battle. She was a woman living 2 lives, one visible and one buried. And every day, the distance between them grew wider, until one unexpected moment changed everything. It was during one of those grey lunch breaks, when the city felt colder than usual and the sky seemed permanently overcast, that Avery first met him. She had taken her usual seat on the rooftop courtyard, a small bench by the edge of the railing. Her sketch pad lay open on her lap, but her pencil hadn't moved in minutes. Her hands were still, her thoughts louder than traffic below. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her until a soft voice spoke. "You draw like someone who remembers what the world used to feel like." Startled, she looked up. A tall man in a perfectly pressed grey uniform stood before her, holding a mop handle in one hand and a warm paper cup in the other. His name tag read Lewis. His skin was worn and sun-browned, his eyes a soft, stormy blue, and his smile, when it slowly unfolded, was the kind you remembered long after the conversation ended. Avery blinked, unsure what to say. He handed her the coffee without asking. You looked cold, he said simply. That was the beginning. Lewis Carter had been the building's janitor for over 25 years. Most people walked past him without a second glance, but Avery noticed him. How he whistled while cleaning. How he knew everyone's name. How he never seemed rushed. Each day after that, he found her during lunch, sometimes just nodding, sometimes sitting beside her, to talk about things most people ignored. He had a voice like worn leather, and a way of listening that made silence feel safe. One afternoon, as Avery flipped through her older drawings, pages yellowed from time and neglect, Lewis leaned forward and said, "My wife, Rose, used to draw like that. She'd lose hours in a brush stroke." Avery turned toward him, surprised. "Your wife was an artist." He nodded slowly. "Mixed media, charcoal, oils, sometimes fabric. We built her a little studio out back. A shed turned sanctuary. She passed about 8 years ago. I couldn't bring myself to clean it out." He paused, looking at her hands still stained faintly with graphite. "But I think she would have liked you." From that day forward, their friendship deepened. Over soup cups and steam, they shared stories, his about Rose, about grief, about letting go too late, hers about childhood sketchbooks, and the ache of growing up with dreams she wasn't allowed to chase. "I see it in you," Lewis told her one rainy Thursday. "The way Rose used to look when she held a brush. It's still there, even if you've buried it beneath deadlines and spreadsheets." She smiled, but only halfway. "Some of us don't have the luxury to live off passion." He tilted his head, serious now. "Maybe. But some of us don't realize what we've traded until it's too late." Avery didn't answer. But that night, she opened her sketchpad again, not just to draw, but to breathe. And somewhere in that rooftop courtyard, between the sound of rain and the scent of old coffee, a door began to crack open. The sky was heavy the morning it all came crashing down. It was March, one of those raw, windy Chicago mornings where the air bites through your coat and everything feels uncertain. Rumors had been swirling through the office like wildfire. Budget, cuts, restructuring, layoffs. Avery tried to ignore them, kept her head down, focused on her spreadsheets. She was punctual, precise, never missed a deadline. That had to count for something. At 10 a.m., the calendar pinged, a mandatory all-hands meeting. The entire finance department squeezed into the glass-walled conference room on the 18th floor. Avery took her seat, heart thudding harder than she wanted to admit. Chad Ellison, the department director, entered with his usual air of smug authority, flanked by 2 strangers from HR. Their expressions were blank, but their presence screamed bad news. Chad cleared his throat. "As you all know, we're undergoing a strategic shift," he said coldly. "To remain competitive, we must realign and streamline operations. Unfortunately, some roles have been deemed non-essential." Avery felt her stomach twist. She stared straight ahead, trying not to breathe. Too loudly, then she heard it. Avery Bennett. Her name cracked through the room like a whip. After a detailed performance review, Chad continued without flinching. "Your position has been identified as redundant, effective immediately. Please collect your belongings. HR has prepared your exit documents." Time stopped. She couldn't move. Her hands trembled. Her face flushed hot as 30 sets of eyes turned toward her. Some shocked, others silently relieved it wasn't them. No words of thanks. No grace. Just a cold, public dismissal like she was being erased. Avery stood on shaking legs, her breath shallow. Her desk already had a cardboard box waiting, a plant, pens, a framed photo. Her old sketchpad, forgotten in the back of the drawer. She barely remembered packing it all. Every movement felt numb, robotic. As she walked the main hallway toward the elevator, the silence screamed louder than any sound. She felt like a ghost. Then, from the corner of the corridor, a familiar figure emerged. Lewis stood by his janitor's cart, mop in hand, his face calm but serious. Their eyes met. Without a word, he reached into his pocket and extended a small, weathered key, gold-toned, a little tarnished, and placed it in her palm. "It's time," he whispered, his voice steady. Avery stared at him, confused. "Time for what?" "To breathe," he said, just like Rose used to say. He pulled out a folded slip of paper and handed it to her. An address. 1442 Sycamore Lane. No explanation, no pressure. Just a quiet nudge from someone who believed in her more than she believed in herself. That night, after hours of crying into the sleeves of her hoodie, Avery did something she never would have done before. She got into her old pickup truck and drove. The address was 18 miles outside the city, a modest house with a small garden, and behind it, just like he said, was a weathered shed with tall windows and a paint-chipped door. She slid the key into the lock, and just like that, everything began to change. The lock clicked, and the door creaked open. Avery stepped inside slowly, heart pounding like she was trespassing on someone's memory. The air was thick with the scent of thyme, old wood, dried paint, and something else. Something sacred. Dust particles floated in the sunlight that poured through the tall windows. A few cobwebs clung to the corners, but beneath the stillness, the space felt alive. It was as if the studio had been waiting for her. Paintbrushes rested in old glass. Jars, their bristles hardened with color. Blank canvases leaned against the wall like quiet invitations. On a wooden shelf sat thread spools, half-used oil paints, and a sewing machine. In the center of the room stood a sturdy easel draped in an old sheet. Avery hesitated, then pulled it back, revealing a blank canvas. Next to it lay a handwritten letter. She unfolded the note, her hands trembling. "Dear Avery, Rose always believed this space held a special kind of energy, the kind that listens, absorbs, and then gives back in. Unexpected ways. When I first saw your drawings in the courtyard, I knew she would have adored you. You have her light. This studio is yours now. Not as charity, but as recognition of the artist you've always been. Don't let the world steal that from you again." Louis Avery pressed the letter to her chest and sat in silence, tears slipping down her cheeks. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she cleaned. She opened the windows and let the air breathe. She dusted every surface, wiped every shelf, and reorganized the paints by hue. She found a working lamp, fixed the broken leg on a stool, and swept the floor until the original hardwood shined. And when dawn broke, she stood barefoot in the center of the studio and picked up a charcoal pencil. For the first time in years, her hand moved without hesitation. She didn't draw for clients or bosses or anyone else's approval. She drew for herself. For the little girl who used to dream in color, and the woman who had almost forgotten how. Each stroke was a reclaiming, each shade a piece of her spirit returning home. Days passed like hours, with her severance check and what little savings she had. Avery bought new supplies, nothing fancy, just enough to keep going. Her meals were simple, bills were paid with care. She took on small commissions from neighbors, beginning with a $150 baby portrait for Louis's niece. It wasn't much, but it was honest, and it was hers. Still, fear hovered like a shadow. What if this didn't work? What if she ran out of money, of time, of luck? But deep inside, something stronger stirred. A quiet resilience. The same one that had kept her sketching in textbook margins and rooftop corners. Avery had been buried beneath spreadsheets and silence for too long. Now she was breathing again, with color, with fire, with purpose. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear. She wasn't turning back. 2 years later, the studio was unrecognizable. Yet somehow, it still felt exactly like it had that first night. The floors had been refinished. The walls were repainted in soft, earthy tones. Warm lighting filled every corner, and the scent of fresh oils mixed with brewed coffee from the little machine Avery kept near the window. New brushes, upgraded easels, and a rotating display of her own work made the space feel alive. Loved. But she had never touched the photo. It remained on a shelf above the original work table, a black and white picture of Lewis and Rose, taken in front of a lake somewhere far from the city. They looked young, maybe in their 40s, smiling as if the world hadn't touched them yet. It had become Avery's quiet ritual. Every morning, she greeted them like old friends. She had grown so much since that first sketch in the newly cleaned studio. The baby portrait for Lewis's niece sparked more orders. Pet illustrations, family trees, cafe murals, children's book covers. She built a small website, then a growing online following. Clients came by referral, then through social media, and eventually she hired a part-time assistant just to keep up with the paperwork. For the first time in her life, Avery wasn't surviving. She was living. Then came the call. A children's book publisher from New York had found her work online and wanted to commission her to illustrate an entire series. The advance alone was more money than she had ever made in 1 year. At her old corporate job, she nearly dropped the phone. And yet, despite all the success, there was one thing left unfinished. Avery had been working on a special painting in secret, something that had lived in her heart since the day Lewis handed her that golden key. During quiet evenings, in between commissions, she would sit in silence and bring it to life. It was a double portrait, inspired by the old lake photo. But in her painting, Lewis and Rose weren't frozen in time. They were older, silver-haired, smiling, standing together in a garden filled with color. Their hands were clasped, their eyes filled with the kind of love that outlasts decades. She had imagined what their life might have looked like if Rose were still alive, and painted it stroke by stroke. On an ordinary Thursday, she invited Lewis over under the pretense of showing him new work. When he arrived, she led him into the back room where the canvas stood covered. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted the cloth. For a long moment, Lewis didn't speak. He just stared. Then his shoulders dropped, and his eyes brimmed with tears. "You gave me something I never thought I'd see," he whispered. "Us. Growing. Old together." Avery placed a hand on his shoulder. "You gave me the life I never thought I'd live." Lewis smiled, voice shaking. "Life's too short for regrets, kid. The right doors open when we're brave enough to walk through." And standing in the studio, built from memory and courage, Avery knew she had finally walked through the right one. If Avery's journey touched your heart, we'd love to hear from you. What part of her story resonated with you the most? Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between security and your passion? Maybe someone once believed in you when you had stopped believing in yourself, just like Lewis did for Avery. We believe stories have the power to connect us in the most unexpected ways. So take a moment to leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Whether you're in a quiet town or a bustling city, your story matters here. And if you've ever been afraid to take that first step toward your dream, remember, sometimes all it takes is one open door and the courage to walk through it. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell, because tomorrow we're bringing you another story filled with heart, hope, and maybe even a little magic. We can't wait to read your thoughts and continue building this community, one story, one voice, one brave heart at a time.